This episode contrasts the U.S. and international social, health, and media messaging about COVID-19 with the realities of disadvantaged persons and developing countries. It is explicitly not intended as a criticism of the ongoing health policies of the province of Bali or the Republic of Indonesia. If this topic is triggering for you, we suggest you skip this episode and instead donate to any of the charities listed in the info box to help the people of Bali. July 2021. Bali has been mostly closed to tourism for 16 months. Its largest tourism client, Australia, has employed a zero COVID strategy and will not allow travel until 2022. Once crowded resorts, restaurants, and markets stand idle and empty. The resilience and perseverance of the locals has been tested to the limit as they try to hang on for better days. Indonesia, hoping to restart the economy, has prioritized Bali in its vaccination effort, and there is high compliance. This is the backdrop as the Delta variant arrives on this island, forcing the Balinese people to make impossible choices. This isn't how I wanted to join you again. Here in Indonesia, we're going through a 13-fold increase in cases. The restaurants are closed to indoor dining. Most non-essential services are closed. The problem is that the locals have been suffering here for 16 months now without any tourism. And one person told me this morning they'd rather die from COVID than die from starvation. As a guest here, I'm not allowed to criticize the government, nor would I, other than to say there are criticisms that could be made, but they were the ones that had the job of balancing all this against 270 million people in a very low budget, so I don't envy them the task, but it's tough to see. And it's really tough to know people that don't know how they're gonna eat. Ada chorus di sini ya, bernyanyi. Halo. Apa kabar? Ini buntu jalan?
Ya, di situ buntu sampai mentok ke sana aja.
So aku gak bisa lewat oleh di sana ya?
Nggak bisa.
Oh, aduh. Mungkin aku tersesat. Oke, aku cek dulu ya.
Ya, ya.
Oke. I gotta. Wait, what's this? Oh, aduh. Buntu jalan ya?
Ya, buntu jalan.
Oh, aduh.
No.
Teman kejar. Kalau gitu lari. Lari, lari, lari. If I can beat that lady in Lombok that was trying to sell me shit, I can beat these kids. My pants are falling down. Sampai jumpa. I'm exhausted. You try racing three little kids when you got a mask and they don't. So I'm not exactly swimming in money, but I am doing what I can to help where I can. But it's like putting out brush fires, man. A good friend of mine just came home. She's got almost nothing. She came home, find out thieves had poisoned the dogs at her complex, and they got into her place. They made off with just about everything that she owns. They even took the drinking water and just left a big empty jug. And as you can see, everything's out because it's curfew. So almost everything's closed. So imagine that, you've got nothing, right? And you come home and you have nothing to eat. You have nothing to drink. All your money's gone, all your cooking utensils are gone. Thieves are eating, you're not. That's where we're at. And we're only 6 days into this whole lockdown deal. If this goes on longer than 2 weeks, and everyone expects it will, I don't see, I don't know where this is going. And this is the thing, man, you know, I'm here in my nice little apartment, and, you know, I'm probably fine. You know, I can just sit up here for a month and order takeout. And so, can a lot of the people that wanted these restrictions to happen, and unfortunately the spread's so bad right now, they kind of have to happen on some level, but there are people that have been saying we should lock down for a year. Who's going to feed these people? Just so many people completely left out of the conversation since this thing started. It's been a pie fight between the privileged and the privileged. I realize that's not going to be a popular perspective in the United States, but I'm not in the United States, and I'm no longer in a little ivory tower. I'm living amongst these people as best as, well, I'm not really, but they're my friends. And they're screwed. It's the brand new Western huge supermarket that just opened here about 900 meters from my house. It's only the second one in Bali. And all the expats are loving it, and I'm loving it too, because if I got to do lockdown again, I can finally do a good peanut butter and jelly sandwich. But man, I'm in and out in 3 minutes, and I got an N95 for that. Right now, under the current rules, if you are caught outside without a mask and you are a foreigner, you can be instantly deported. The irony is that until recently, basically the protocol is you had to wear one everywhere outside. But once you're inside, if you're at a restaurant or whatever, you can take it off, and that's what most people did. And given the worldwide focus on seeing people masked outside, as opposed to being masked in the places where they're most at risk, how surprising is that?
Halo Kedut, apa kabar?
Kabar baik nyoman.
Ya, mau kemana?
Ya, aku baik-baik aja, tapi aku sedikit kasihan orang lokal karena nggak bisa makan, bisnis nggak bisa berjalan.
Bisnisnya.
Ya.
Ya, karena di Bali mostly dia hidup di pariwisata, no turis, jadinya tidak ada uang. Ya, kalau masih di Jawa masih ada petani, pabrik, masih Bali sudah terlalu minus sekali.
Menurutmu kalau PPKM susah ya masker ya. Kalau dipanjang apa terjadi di sini?
Nah, kalau diperpanjang semakin sulit. Sekarang saja sudah susah. Karena kalau diperpanjang sampai lagi seminggu, 2 minggu masih oke. Nanti next month lagi diperpanjang itu
Ya.
tidak bisa, semua sudah belum tikar, sudah mau balik ke kampung.
Aduh. Oh, itu lebih baik ya. Mana dengan PPKM?
PPKM. I don't have any idea about this program. Yeah, but we're still struggling here and trying to make something for our family at home. Thank you.
I'm actually going to see the status of the beach, which has been closed since the 3rd, but I'm seeing an awful lot of bikes parked up there. As I stay behind the barrier that I'm supposed to stay behind, I can still take a picture of the beach. Well, there's people back there, but it's pretty empty. This is another one of those things that drove me crazy in the early days of the pandemic in America, when we closed all the parks, we closed all the beaches, and we were constantly being shown these shaming videos of all these crowded people on the beaches, which implied that that was the most dangerous place to be, was outside, and actually it was exactly the opposite. Now again, I'm not criticizing what's going on here now, because given how contagious Delta is and how many Indonesians usually gather on that beach, maybe this is the right call. Something like 99% of COVID cases were spread indoors. In fact, the three most important factors for COVID, according to every contact study you will ever read, is indoor ventilation, length of exposure time, and people verbalizing case after case after case. And we have known this since April of 2020. And yet, the World Health Organization, the United Nations organization that guides the response of so much of the world, including Indonesia, focused everybody on washing their hands, despite the fact that we still don't have a documented case of COVID being spread by touch anywhere. And if it does happen, it's very, very rare. Masks and social distancing do work, but they're heavily dependent on the kind of mask you use and the environment you're in. Those three factors I talked about that we never discussed, that we were never educated about. The indoor ventilation thing, exposure time, people talking. While we were saying wear a mask, we could have also been saying open a window. The World Health Organization didn't acknowledge that this was airborne until a year afterwards. We made people think that by washing their hands they were safe, or by wearing any kind of a mask in any kind of place they were safe, and that was never true, because you couldn't have this discussion. Mask or no mask. If we'd spent as much time educating people on the right kind of mask to use, when they're effective, when they're not enough, when they're superfluous, and made people think about the actual ways this is transmitted, we could have saved a lot of effort and, I believe, a lot of lives. In America, all we think about is red and blue, Trump, anti-Trump, Democrat, Republican, but there's a whole world of people that aren't part of this discussion. People in nursing homes, people in prisons, people in low-income housing situations, people in third world countries like this one. They had no ability to follow the instructions that we gave them, especially not over this length of time.
Even after more and more studies showed COVID risks were concentrated in specific areas, the health guidance stayed broad-based, generic, and only partially effective, while a click-driven media only focused us on the scariest possibilities. When cases rose, it was always blamed on people not strictly following the protocols. The only place the protocols themselves could be criticized were in right-wing and conspiracy media that were spreading their own, even more toxic misinformation.
You can't just scare the shit out of people all the time. You can't just deny everything all the time. Every other variant that has hit us has been 10% real danger and 90% media hype. This one's not. Me and a lot of other people like me were pretty skeptical, because of crying wolf, because of a media that pumped up every outlier case to scare us into compliance, didn't tell us where this was really happening, didn't give us a real accurate sense of context or risk. And then when something real comes down the pike, we're exhausted. There's still some places you can go and chill out if you know where to look. Well, it's July 19th, and what they call the PPKM or PPKM, the emergency order, it's supposed to end tomorrow, but everyone knew it wasn't going to. You know, asking Indonesians not to socialize is like asking water not to run downhill. It's one of the things I love about this part of the world. So you have that, and also just the need to sustain an underground economy, because there aren't any food rations coming and people just can't stop needing food.
Then you got Indonesia. They got 270 million people to worry about. They gotta have people stay put to control this thing. But they also understand that people gotta eat. And then you have the very small but very vocal expat community, a lot of whom are Australian or from other countries that lock down real hard, and they'd like to see the same kind of thing happen here. But, you know, it's just not realistic for these people. I mean, since the very beginning of this has kind of been my issue with how we've handled COVID. We had to do something, but we needed to think about how to sustain this over the long term and what people's actual needs are. People just can't shut themselves up for a year and a half. I mean, there are a few that can, and it seems like an awful lot of them drove our thinking. I mean, look, anyone who raises the objection that this is a worldwide pandemic and we hadn't experienced anything like that before, you're right. But we had so many opportunities to change course, and it just became like this unalterable trajectory. When we were told 2 weeks to flatten the curve, the whole point of putting it that way was to forestall any questioning of how sustainable this strategy was going to be. When I talk about this stuff, people just want to keep talking about, oh, but those horrible anti-vaxxers or whatever. It's like, yeah, I dig it. But just like when we were obsessing over the people in the park that had their mask, you know, a lot of the people getting COVID are people that didn't have options to avoid it. As we go up the socioeconomic scale, and I've talked about this before, we tend to have our lives more and more in bubbles. We isolate ourselves. We looked to the red states and said, you know, how could you guys be in denial? How could you guys not take this seriously? And look, there was a lot of that going on. I'm not trying to deny any of that happened or that our United States government at the time handled anything particularly well. They didn't. And if you think so, I don't know what to tell you. However, the flip side of that, it was much easier for people living in bubbles to think that this was something we could sustain indefinitely. And that any discussion of how this was going to affect us that fell outside the parameters of case numbers of COVID had to be shut down preemptively because it was somehow pro-Trump or killing grandma to go to Applebee's or whatever. Shaming them when they can't go without seeing their families for that length of time. They can't suspend their living, they can't suspend their lives. How long can you expect people to just overlook their traditions or their families or their lives? 2 months, 3 months, 5 months? Sure. 16 months? Yeah, there's a lot of assholes in there, people that don't follow the rules, people that don't care, but at some point, when does it stop being the people's fault and it starts being the fault of people that didn't think through how sustainable all this stuff was going to be and the effect it would have on the lives of the people that can't just hermetically seal themselves off? It was just easier to look at the scapegoat, the person that was pissing us off, and confine our thinking to that. And that's just how things are these days. Well, let's look at some nice stuff. That line of people is to get free rides. That's good. I'm glad to see something like that's going on.
Not long after I passed the spread line, the World Health Organization urged a reluctant Indonesian President Jokowi to get tougher and, quote, implement stringent public health and social measures throughout the country. On the same day, Bloomberg asserted that, quote, business elites, unquote, were behind the president's hesitance, even though later that week, Jokowi would state, quote, as I visited the villages and the cities, so many people are screaming for a reopening. A lockdown won't necessarily end the problem.
Hey!
Pilih.
Ah, aku melihat gang ini apa aja.
Oh ya.
Ya, tapi buntu jalan ya.
Ya, jalannya buntu, jadi
Oh.
nyaman.
Oh, maaf ya.
Nggak apa-apa.
Ya, apa kabar anjing?
Baik sekali. Maaf saya tidak pakai masker karena di rumah. Di sini banyak bunga katanya ibu di rumah.
Banyak bunga?
Iya.
Oh, baik ya. Boleh aku lihat?
Oh, boleh.
Oh, wow. Serta. Oh, indah ya.
Oh, indahnya.
Makasih. Dan di sana sudah ada sekolah ya?
Ya, ada sekolah.
Ini ada hubungan dengan sekolah atau tidak?
Tidak.
Oh, gitu.
Ya,
Anjing bersahabat sekarang ya?
Iya.
Ya. Dan bagaimana PPKM kamu?
Sungguh seperti
Hmm.
seperti daun ini layu.
Gitu ya.
Ya, tetap semangat.
Ya,
Bye.
ya.
Ya, hati-hati.
Now you saw that she was apologetic in her own alley that she wasn't wearing a mask. And part of that is because we bule, the foreigners here, are just seen as being very COVID paranoid. But there's another thing that we don't really think about. The more money that you have, the more you isolate yourself from risk to the point where you want to live your life with zero risk. So COVID became this thing that shook up the worlds of so many people that felt themselves pretty isolated from things coming to get them. But if you're poor or underprivileged, especially if you're living in a country with low per capita income like Indonesia, for example, you have to assess risk every single day. People here have to contend with dengue fever, which is in its own way just as nasty as COVID, plus the daily threat of diseases that they can't treat because they can't afford the doctor bill, and just scrounging up enough money to live even under good circumstances. So this is another place where those of us with economic privilege don't realize to what extent our risk calculations are vastly different than people that have a lot less money than we do. COVID doesn't just freak us out because it's dangerous. It is. But to us, we maybe even overstate the danger to ourselves because we're experiencing an actual danger for a lot of us the first time of this nature. But if you don't have a lot of money, for some people this is just another day at the races, you know. They're just not going to look at it the way we do. And again, that's going to drive your COVID numbers, both in terms of the spread and in terms of people getting sick and dying. Well, it's the 26th, and the government extended the restrictions for one more week, but left a few little changes that are fairly big loopholes for limited outdoor dining, which pretty much means all the local WA rooms will reopen. A lot of the expat community are up in arms about this. Why don't we lock down for longer, let people, you know, prepare and don't raise their hopes. It's just weird to me because I've only lived here a year and a half total, and I'm sure these people have lived here a lot longer than me, but it makes perfect sense that the government did this. A week was all they could get away with. They knew the people, far from welcoming a longer lockdown, it wouldn't have been a good reaction. The risk assessment for local folks is a lot different than for the bule. Berapa?
15.
People say I should have more food on this show, so let's take a quick walk around the local market, shall we? A whole bunch of fried stuff. And you can see they got donuts, they've got like a pierogi kind of a thing. This is similar to teriyaki. And each one of these costs about 1,000 or 2,000 rupiah, which is, I don't know, about 15 cents, 30 cents, something like that. It's well below $1. Each of these things, yeah. This is pisang goreng, fresh off the fryer. A martabak stand. I've never had martabak because it's full of egg. Probably not good for cholesterol, but it's something like a quiche. I love that guy's hair. Rambut bagus ya. Apa kabar, Bim?
Okay, baik, bagus.
Yeah. Because they've opened up this loophole for outdoor dining under certain conditions, this basically opens up about 60% of the restaurants in this area. And the reason is because most places are open to the outside air. You have a full wall of exposure to fresh air, which is something I wish we had emphasized in the West. Bagaimana di sini, Bim, dengan PPKM?
Yeah, the PPKM for me is really bad because people cannot going out and then cannot allow for dine-in. But at the moment it's so good because the government say yes for dine-in, but only 1% 30 minutes for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will eat fast, okay?
But not so fast. It's not good. But 30 minutes is okay.
So, so you've been closed now for 2 weeks, 3 weeks to indoor dining?
2 weeks
How many guests have you had?
for takeaway.
Yeah.
For takeaway, one day is maybe 5, 6. It depends.
So how much do you take in per day? What during PPKM?
The maybe 300 until 500, the big one.
And how many people work here, Ben?
At the moment, because of PPKM, 2 people.
Yeah. And how many people did you have to let go during PPKM?
5.
There were 7 people, now there's 2?
Yes, still 2.
Hello.
Selamat sore.
Selamat sore. Hello, how are you?
Baik, dan kamu?
Baik.
Ya.
Mau beli obat? Oke, please tip money. Tip money dan jangan.
Ya, maafkan saya Ibu. Aku sudah ada teman-teman yang aku sedang tolong. Maafkan saya.
Oh ya, sama-sama, terima kasih.
Today's the second day under the new restrictions, and I got a chance to look at the official letter, the surat, that tells us all the rules. And it's written in a really interesting way. Basically, they've loosened the restrictions in such a way to allow the locals to reopen most of their businesses and carry on with their lives. Apa kabar? So we'll just have to see if the predicted explosion in cases happens. But there's one thing in the letter that really made me kind of thrilled. Remember all the stuff I've been saying about the most important things with this pandemic is how it's transmitted and how we should be aware of exposure time, poor ventilation, and people talking. Well, for the first time I've ever seen it, it was front and center in this letter. As part of the health instructions, above masks, above social distancing. They even had the thing about open a window in there. It was so thrilling to see because, look, it's probably much too little too late, but just to have somebody official prioritize that stuff finally, especially in a place like Bali where being outdoors is so doable. It was just great to see. Boleh ke pantai atau tidak?
Boleh.
Terima kasih. Oh, this is nice. It's been a real privilege to be down here during a time when the tourists are mostly absent and it's reverted to being a playground for the locals. But as you can see, not too much going on right now. So it's July 29th. There's some sign that things might be stabilizing here in Indonesia, but in this province of Bali, things are still going up, despite now 71% first vaccination achieved. This Delta thing, man, just kind of sucks. A lot of the foreigners that are still here are getting out because they're getting scared and they want to go home and get better vaccinations. Me, nope. No, I'm gonna stay here. It was really difficult to get here. I don't know if I went back what would be there for me or how long it would be before I could get back here again. And yeah, no, I'm here. But you know, one of the people leaving I saw posting on one of the expat boards, and as I've said, the foreigners on the internet have been among the most vocal about their unhappiness about how this is being handled. And one of the people that's leaving was leaving after 25 years. He was obviously someone they all knew. I don't know who he is, but he ran a business here, employed a lot of people. And he was saying, you know, it was time for him to go because he could see where things were going and it wasn't good, but he was kind of asking everybody to cut the locals some slack. And he made a similar point to what I've been saying, but he said it more eloquently. If you're reading this, he said, you've still got access to a phone, to internet, to most of your lives, and there are thousands of people for whom that's no longer a reality. So if you see somebody eating in a warung because there's a big loophole in the new restrictions that will allow the locals to do that, they're just trying to keep their employees alive and fed. You know, for a lot of people, this is like back to March 2020 because it seems like there's so many breakthrough infections and Delta's so much more virulent. That's leaving out an awful lot of progress. And the thing everybody forgets is that an awful lot of us have had this thing and an awful lot more are about to get it. The virus is just going to run out of places to go. And if we have this mythical virus that evades the vaccines, you know, and this never ends, one way or another, we have to stop living like this. And I know a lot of people in America are up in arms about anti-vaxxers and how much that's halting progress. Let me be very clear, I'm not one of those people. In fact, I was pushing the vaccines back when nobody trusted them because they thought it was a Trump conspiracy. I'm all over the vaccines. I think they're great. But the other part of it, the part of it that says that it's reasonable to ask people to closet themselves away from advancement in their life, seeing their loved ones, furthering their romantic connections, doing the things that make life worth living for them. We can ask people to do that indefinitely. One way or another, we are going to have to let go of that idea. We must.